Hey everybody, we are live this Thursday morning, bright and early for everybody. This week was different than our regular Tuesday afternoons, but we wanted to get a Volley Talk in this week. So here we are Thursday morning. So this is going to be our Volley Talk of the week. This is Volley Talk number 11. And today we are going to be talking all about owning your training. And then we're going to get into some specific hate slash questions, comments from Facebook and Instagram, stuff like that, that we have been seeing a lot of. So I'm really excited for today's episode. Billy, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, thank you for being here today.
Of course. Hey, Billy Glisson, founder of PowerCore 360, exercise physiologist, strength coach, and here we go.
Yeah, let's do it. So we're going to get right into this today so we have time to get to all those social questions slash comments at the end. But we're going to just start out with 16-year-olds specifically, looking at that age range or the high school age range, I guess, in general, and how you guys need to start owning your training really. Billy, can you talk about this further?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. We work with volleyball with athletes. Most of the time, they're either 12 coming to our clinics, or for the master classes, they have to be 13 or older. So 13s and 14s and 12s, they're getting into club volleyball, they're learning, they're going and taking lessons and trying to get better. But what I see happening all the times is just, athletes go and I guess you should, you go to a coach, you go to a trainer, you go to an instructor and you take a lesson, right? But sometimes I just feel like they're blindly just following what the coach tells them to do. And at some point, not when they're 12, 13, or 14, but for me, I kind of believe that at about 16 years of age, they're mature enough, and especially those that are really trying to get into become a collegiate volleyball athlete, they need to start owning their training. In other words, they need to start knowing what they're doing, why they're doing it, versus just blindly taking some coach's, mine or anybody else's, instruction or lead. Like, why are you doing this? How do you get better? Does it make sense? Does it not? So that's kind of the intro.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about understanding your training, which I believe is such a big thing for athletes to own, right? Like if you are a young athlete, like you said, following your coach just blindly, are you going to be able to get to that point and the goals that you set for yourself? Can you talk more about what does that actually mean? What does understanding your training look like?
Yeah, well, let's set it up a little deeper, a little further. Like in any profession, right? And if we're talking about sports training here, so you talk about probably synonymously coaches, trainers, instructors. We're going to throw them all kind of grouped in together in one term. Like any profession, there's good people out there, there's bad people out there, right? And I'm not bad in a personal way, but in terms of being an instructor, what they're teaching. And so, part of it is trying to figure out who's the right fit. Are you going to a person that's really going to help you get better, or are you just going to go to someone that's teaching what they believe or their bias versus, and I'm going to also set this up with an experience of an athlete that I trained. He's a local kid here from Colorado. He was drafted in professional baseball coming out of high school. He ended up going and playing at Stanford for 3 years. He graduated from Stanford, so he's a smart kid. He was drafted again when he left Stanford, went to professional baseball. But I remember him telling me one time, and he was a hitter, right? And a power hitter. And so he told me one time he was at Stanford, right? A really highly reputable baseball program, right? Probably top 10 every year. And he told me one day he was on the field and he went from he called three turtles. There were three hitting stations on the field at practice. And, they're probably 60, 70, 80, 100 yards apart. He went through three, had three different coaches talk to him that day. And every one of them gave him different hitting instructions, right? And he told me, he said, I was so frustrated. He was just like, can somebody be consistent with their teaching, right? Well, part of understanding or really owning your training for a young athlete, for a 16-year-old male or female, is starting to be able to pick your coaches, because there's going to be a difference. And a lot of these coaches, I'm sure at Stanford, they were all really good, but they all had different philosophies 100 yards apart, teaching the same hitters three different ways of hitting. And so, here's what a parent and an athlete has to wade through in sports training. You can choose the sport. Volleyball, in this case, we're talking about hitting or jumping or blocking or some specific skill. athletes and parents have to wade through. There's going to be differences in opinion. There's differences, just like you said earlier. There's some hate people in our Facebook group that don't believe in what we do. Different people have different biases, different philosophies, right? That's okay. That's going to happen. There's actually more than one way to do something in sports training to get better. But there are good ways and bad ways. And really, to make a succinct point, I'd really like to see athletes when they're 16 start choosing coaches and instructors and trainers, not based on their reputation or where they play, but how good are they at actually teaching something that's really credible, that's actually going to make the athlete better at their skills.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I could definitely see why that athlete, Jake, would be super frustrated having three coaches, especially if you're hitting in a row and you hit one and then you go to the one coach tells you something and you go another one, that coach tells you something different. At that point, you don't know what to focus on and your training kind of gets lost, and the mental side of it probably gets lost a little bit as well because you're just focused on why are these coaches all telling me a little
Yeah,
different things.
it's super hard. I mean, you've been to a million of our clinics, and so we go to a clinic, and of course we're teaching very specific, very complex power hitting mechanics or techniques, skills, if you would, right? And it's so different so many times for some young athletes, and the parents, kid is usually young and they won't say it, but the parent will recognize that what we're teaching is different from a lot of what they might be hearing in high school or in club. And so how do we deal with that? Well, there are differences of opinion, and really here's the bottom line. Here's one of the examples of what we mean by own your training. At 16 years of age, start researching what you're doing, what you're training. If you're trying to get better at hitting, jumping, blocking, digging, whatever it is, passing, then start really researching it. Don't just go on and just follow instructions, because I've seen athletes that go to three different instructors for the same concept. They're going to hear three different things. They're setting themselves up for frustration. You got to, I mean, let's Google it, right? Let's go out and Google. As a 16-year-old athlete, you know how to Google. Go out and Google things on hitting or vertical jump, and start finding out what the standard kinds of practices are, right? There's training methodologies, given science-based sound methodologies or something. And so go out and research it, Google it. And then ask questions. Parents, same thing. Ask questions when you're going to a coach or trainer. What's your belief? What's your bias? Et cetera, et cetera. Start digging a little deeper versus just thinking that this person's the latest and the greatest. They might be. Then again, they may not be. So do a little homework, Google it, figure out, what you can do to better understand or own your training.
Yeah. And let's say that an athlete, I just want to put my feet in the shoes of an athlete right now,
Yep.
and think like them. Let's say I do Google it and I find X, Y, and Z are the best ways scientifically to train, or science proven ways that aren't going to hurt me, but they're not going to hurt my body, and I'm actually going to hit harder. What do I do with that information once I have it and it's maybe a bit different than what a coach has been teaching me?
Well, communication, right? And then that's why when 13 and 14 and maybe even 15, they're not necessarily very expressive yet. So maybe their communication skills, and they're young, right? And it can be intimidating trying to go talk to somebody that's 5, 10, 15, 40 years older, right? So, but use the information. Google it, go and talk to the coach or the instructor about it. And you should be able to have a sound conversation. And if your coach or instructor really knows what they're doing and they can check their ego at the door, it's like part of your job is to help that young athlete learn, grow, and develop, right? So have an open conversation and maybe be able to talk about the differences in technique or philosophy. Once again, there's different ways to get it, at anything, how to jump higher, how to hit the ball harder, how to block better, right? But there are some standard ways to do it that make more sense scientifically, that place the athlete's body at less risk for injury or pain or something else, and probably will help them improve their performance, hitting, jumping, blocking, whatever, faster. So use it, use the information, have conversation, talk. And in my opinion, one of the things we'll probably touch on today is, we all have egos, right? You have an ego, I have an ego. But in my opinion, if I'm a young athlete, I better be able to find a coach that can check their ego at the door and understand that their job is not to be this figurehead like, I know all this, you just need to listen to me, this is the Bible. No, it's like be able to go and have an open, honest conversation that's not stressful. It's just like, hey, your job as a coach, instructor, trainer, just take a young human, a young athlete here, and help them develop and help them understand what you're going to do and why you're going to do it and why it might be different from other standard practices or training techniques that are out there.
Yeah, and I think this is also a good opportunity, like we're talking about, for not only athletes to own their training, but learn how to really communicate what they want out of their goals, and then also be able to advocate for themselves too. I think that's a really good skill that these 15, 16, 17-year-olds can learn when it comes to standing up for themselves for their training.
Yeah, and it's hard, right? I mean, I I think a parent and an athlete has to be careful. If you're going to ask a 13-year-old to go have a conversation with a coach about playing time or skills or hitting technique or this or that, that's a tall task, right? So parents have to help with that. But at 16 years of age, you should be able to start doing that. So anyway, I think you're right. I think it's a great skill for them to start to learn to develop.
Yeah. And let's say now I'm an athlete, I've talked to my coach, we're starting to train in the correct ways, or I found somebody that's going to train me in the correct ways that I want. How do I know if I'm actually getting better versus getting worse? I know there's a lot of frustration that comes with training. So, how can athletes know if they're seeing the signs that they're getting better?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a simple answer: measure it. And I'm amazed, with some of the athletes that we train, and they come in and they might be working with someone else outside on something similar to what we might do in terms of hitting or jumping or something else. And for example, there's an athlete I work with locally that's doing vertical jump training somewhere else, right? And I ask, well, how's your vert going? What are you jumping? I don't know. Well, what do you mean? You're going to a vertical jump program and you're not measuring your vertical jump, right? So if you're going to a vert program, you should be measuring your vertical jump. If you're going to power hitting training, you should be measuring your velocity. And there's things that aren't so much quantitative, numerical, right? Like you can do a video analysis, right? But still, even if it's qualitative, right? You're looking at an athlete's video, their technique for jumping, hitting, blocking, whatever. It still should be based on some sound principles, and you should be able to sit down with the coach, the instructor, the trainer, say, what are you looking at? What are we trying to do here? What does the ideal model look like? What are you teaching me to actually do here? And then, am I doing it? Am I making progress? But if you're not measuring it, you're not getting any better. And in my opinion, you're not owning your training. You're throwing money down a deep black crevasse, right? And measure it. If you're not measuring it, how do you know where you're going?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that honestly, like specifically, your athlete that you just talked about that's doing vertical jump training, in my opinion, one of the best things about training is being able to measure your results and then see that the hard work is paying off. And if you're missing that point to measure, you can only guess if you're getting better. And that's never as fun, in my opinion. It's always more fun to see that improvement.
Yeah, I'm going to share another story. And this is when I got into sports training, doing this stuff probably 25 years ago. Selfishly, I was trying to get better at golf. And that's how I built the harness systems and all that. It was personally for me to try to learn how to turn my hips. I was a basketball player, a point guard, so I was good forwards, backwards, jumping vertically. But I really didn't grow up doing anything where I had to rotate my hips, my shoulders, my arms, and swing a bat, swing my arm, do anything rotationally sports wise. Anyway, started to play golf, and I would sit here and go hit golf balls, and I would listen to a local golf instructor, right, who by the way is still giving lessons, but the way he was teaching, and people loved him, right? So this is a little warning up front to say it's great that you like your instructor, your teacher, your trainer, but you're not going there to build a lifelong relationship with them to be friends. You're going there to develop, and this is my bias, right? Here's the deal: that instructor, still to this day, if you were going to take a golf lesson from this individual, this is how they would teach. They would say, hit a ball, you'd hit a couple balls, and they'd say, how does that feel, right? And that's a great question, right? Darian, if I was working with you on hitting, and I'd say, how does that feel? Well, it feels good, it feels bad, it hurts, it's this or that. But there was never really any instruction. And so he would just turn around and say, okay, well, hit another, hit another, hit another. How does that feel? Okay, hit another. Be careful with just liking your coaches. Yes, it's nice to find a personality in a coach that you like. Dig a little bit deeper under the covers and find out what's the methodology, what are you going to train, how are you going to train it, And then do you still like them as you're doing these things? And of course, like you just said, measure it, make sure you're getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's kind of shift here a little bit, not shift, but just change gears, I guess, from knowing that, okay, this is what I want to do and this is, I care about my training and this is the digging I did. But let's say these athletes maybe don't know exactly how to train yet, like an elite athlete. Like they've been maybe through middle school, a little bit of high school, or just starting high school, and they don't know how to train elite. How can they learn that?
Well, once again, go to Google it, and learn just standard methodologies for training. Right? I mean, there's millions of books, there's millions of articles, there's millions of videos, and once again, you ought to be able to communicate with your coach, your instructor, your trainer, and that ought to be part of their responsibility to start educating an athlete for, for example. What's a workout segment or a session really look like? Do you just jump in and start banging balls? Well, no, there should be a warm up. And even to that point, I still see, I mean, 15 or 20 years ago when I was getting my strength and conditioning certification the first time, I went to a couple of different camps and clinics, right, to learn myself how to do it. And, there's something called dynamic or active warm up that's been going on for 20 years. That's what you do with an athlete. You warm them up dynamically or athletically. But I still see athletes going out and doing passive stretches, right, as part of their warm up. That's a no-no with anybody that really knows how to train athletes, right? So the athlete needs to become educated. The coach, trainer, instructor needs to educate those athletes and the parents as well. Once again, when they're 16 or older, like, what's a workout segment look like? Well, you ought to warm up first. It ought to be active, right? It ought to be dynamic. And we go into our training modes, right? Whatever we're doing, we're working on strength, we're working on vertical jump, change of direction, hitting, blocking, digging, whatever it is. And then what about cool down? What about recovery, foam rolling, stretching, hydration, nutrition, right? All those are part of being an athlete, and into your terms, an elite athlete. You want to become a really good club or high school athlete or want to go play college. It's your body, right? It's your back, it's your shoulder, it's your knees. Train yourself, right? And educate yourself, and then measure it, and then feel, how do you feel when you try different things, right? So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I preach that now to young athletes as somebody who maybe took care of my body, but always was like, well, I'm young, my body feels good, like, whatever. My shoulder will hurt for a week and then I'll be fine. But as you get older, those injuries really do start to catch up with you. So making sure that you're actually owning your training and making sure you're taking ownership of your body too at that point and saying, this is what I want. I don't want injuries. I want to feel good when I'm young still. And I want to be able to play the sport I love for longer. So whatever your reason is for it, I think that it's a huge part of learning how to train and caring about your training as well.
Let's touch, Darian, on that for a second, because your history is some people know. You actually, just let's talk about your collegiate injury history. Let's make that
Yeah.
first. Let's refresh people's understanding of it.
Yeah, so when I was in college, or I guess before college, I got recruited as an outside hitter to play. My freshman year, I started playing. Started my freshman year, was super excited. Um, Played outside that whole year, and then going into the spring. Obviously, spring training is very hard on your body, so I was training outside all spring, swinging a million reps because it's just practice, and they just had you swing, swing, swing nonstop. By the end of that and going into my sophomore year fall, my shoulder had completely just been like aching. I couldn't lift it anymore. I remember there was a preseason game or a preseason tournament that we were at, and we played 2 games in one day. And after that day, I couldn't lift my shoulder above 90 degrees, which was a pretty bad sign. And they, instead of trying to fix or find the root cause of the issue, they just said, okay, we'll just move you to libero. And so I moved to libero, played libero my sophomore, junior, and senior year. And then my 5th year, I got a new coach, and he actually played against me. Not played against me, but his team had played against my team when I was a freshman and when I was a hitter. He said, hey, I saw you hit your freshman year, so I want you to hit again this year. And I was like, okay, well, why not, I guess. Like, I'm just going to do what my coach says. So We're in spring training at this point before the 5th year starts. And about a month into that training, come down on one leg and completely tear up my ACL, meniscus, MCL, all of the things that you can do to your knee after landing on one leg. So definitely not a super fun experience. And then, from being a libero, I always was diving, and knees were going to my knees were going to the chest when I'm diving and stuff like that. And then, about 7, 8 months ago, I had hip surgery to fix my torn labrum that happened during volleyball. So, all really fun things, not really. So, athletes, when we say, like, this is your body, this is your training, you really have to own it and advocate for yourself. These are the reasons why. And we got a question here saying, what school was it? It is the University of North Dakota. The coaches there are now fantastic. If you check them out, they are some great coaches. They actually do train very similar mechanics to what we train now. I just wish I would have had them when I was a freshman, not a senior, after 5 years of playing collegiately. So yeah, absolutely. That was my experience.
So Darian, let's segue into that a little bit. So, one of the things I talk about is common sense, and maybe the statement I like to say is let's pump the brakes here a little bit, right? And as you know, I mean, once again, we're going to get into some people that don't necessarily agree with what we teach. Great, okay, that creates an opportunity for learning for whatever, right? So sometimes we say let's pump the brakes. Let's talk about pain and what the pain is, what for the body. It's a warning sign, right? But yet so many young athletes, because they're used to having shoulder pain or arm pain or back pain when they swing, they think it's natural. They think it's just part of the process. Well, it's not. Pain is the body's indication that something's not right. Oftentimes, in my opinion, it can be related, especially with hitting, to mechanics or bad mechanics or poor technique, right? But you shouldn't be pushing through pain, and it's not um, a badge, a merit of honor, or anything, or a badge of honor. It's not. You should stop. You should listen to your body. Pump the brakes. If it hurts, stop. If you're, and this is part of the owning your training, right? Is for a young athlete, we want them to understand when they're 16. If something hurts, stop before they're like you. They've had shoulder surgery, hip surgery, all these things by the ripe old age of 22 or 23 or whatever you are, right? That's way too much wear and tear. So they need to understand, what to do. If the weight's too heavy, they're in the weight room, right? They're working with a strength coach, and you're doing squats, RDLs, or whatever exercise it is. You're pushing a sled, right? If the weight's too heavy and something hurts, stop and tell somebody, adjust it, right? Nobody's going to be made in a day. You're not going to make an elite athlete in a day, but you can certainly injure one and end a career in one day or in one rep, right? If something's too heavy, too stressful. So once again, the athlete needs to understand strength training and recovery and what should it feel like. What is pain that's okay? What is pain that's not okay, right? And I know Kelly's been on as a physical therapist and talked about this a little bit, but pain in the middle of a muscle belly, let's take your bicep, right? So if you get some pain in maybe in the middle of a muscle belly, that might be okay, but you should ask somebody. You get pain in the joint, the elbow, the shoulder, the spine, those are flashing red, hard stoplights, like stop right now. You should be able to talk to your coach, your trainer, and instructor, and they should be able to guide you or advise you. Or, and if they're at a level where they've got an athletic trainer or somebody else, and they may not know, but they should have a resource there very quickly to figure out, is this an issue? And the athlete needs to learn from that and not try to push through those things. And you're a perfect example of someone that was super motivated, competitive, great athlete, and didn't really know, right? And you just thought, oh, well, you just pushed through this, right? And now, 2, 3 surgeries later, once again at 22 or 23, you've experienced it firsthand. So anyway,
Yeah.
the last thing on this, in terms of just pump the brakes, is if you're not getting better, stop. Have a discussion, right? And I'm not talking about necessarily in a day, but even in one session, whatever you're working on, you should get a little bit better each day. If you go take a lesson and you're not making some progress in that lesson, then maybe the technique is not right, maybe the instruction's not right. It might be super hard and complex and difficult, but you ought to be making some progress. If you're going 2 or 3 sessions, a week or 2 weeks, and you're not getting better, something's not right. And to me, it's like pump the brakes and go have a discussion with somebody and own your training, right? If you're not getting better, go find somebody else. There's plenty of options out there. You're doing this for development, right? To get better, measure it, communicate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key takeaway for today is what we're trying to preach is just really direct your training, own your training, and find what is best for you and advocate for yourself in that way. Yeah, so that's hopefully you guys got some good information out of that. We actually have a couple of comments slash questions here from this discussion. The first one being, in you under 17 school-based team, what could be appropriate training program? Is it necessary to lift weights at that age? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that in lift weights, so because some people's perspective of lift weights means squats, RDLs, heavy weights on their back, there's a lot of different ways to start doing strength training. And at age 12 and 13, you can do strength training, but it's not strength training like a high school or college athlete with 200 pounds or 300 pounds on their back or doing heavy RDLs. It's just loading the muscles. Once again, start owning your training to know how to improve your strength. So you can use resistance bands. You can use the young age's body weight, right? You can start working on your mechanics. That's what we do in vertical jump. In the first month, there's very little heavy weightlifting we do. We're allowing the athlete to start to move and coordinate their body with body weight, yet they're starting to load, put resistance, greater resistance on the muscles that are going to help them jump, their leg muscles, their hip butt, right? Whatever the case is, those muscles get stronger in the first month. We don't do very much heavy weight training in the first month, right? But we're still putting a load on there, a safe load, and then progressive load, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're working on hitting, vertical jump, or whatever. We want to be able to progressively increase the load, the weight, the resistance for them. And whether that's jumping, hitting, whatever the case is, that's the objective.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. Our second comment is, one reoccurring problem I see is volleyball athletes going to a PT with an issue, and most of the time it's deemed as an overuse injury, where I believe it's more of a poor swing technique. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a PT. Kelly might be better equipped to answer this from a PT's perspective, but I would agree with the last part of that statement or question is, yeah, I think a lot of pain, especially related to hitting for the shoulder and the back, it's poor technique. But oftentimes that's the same technique that they're being taught by a lot of coaches and trainers who are, trying to do the right thing, but maybe aren't up on the anatomy, the physiology, the science of the body and how it really works and loads. And so, yeah, I would agree. Oftentimes it could be very much poor swing technique. And so either way, in my opinion, the good PTs I've worked with will understand if they're seeing a lot of volleyball athletes, they're communicating with someone that probably knows the technique and can say, yeah, you need to improve your technique. And they may even look at a video and say, watch them swing and say, you need to work with someone that isn't going to teach this action here, right? That's going to help you load your whole body and put less isolated stress on the shoulder.
Yeah, and I think like she says, or like you said, Billy, um, the it's not the PT's job, every PT's job to know volleyball. It's your job to go out and find a PT that knows and understands volleyball or works with volleyball athletes, at least has and can understand the technique. And that's part of the same thing with owning your training. You could just go to any coach that maybe has never even coached volleyball before, and you could get lessons from them. It might not be the best thing for you, but you have to advocate for yourself and make sure you're seeking out those right people. And I think the same thing goes for when you're seeking out PTs or any other kind of thing like that.
Yeah, and you're right. It just comes down to pump the brakes, listen to your body. If it hurts, stop doing it. If you have pain in your shoulder, your back, your knees, more than one session, you have 2 or 3 sessions, don't keep pushing through it. Something's wrong. It might be poor mechanics. It might be, especially for a young athlete, a muscle imbalance. They need some strength, they need some flexibility, some stability, mobility, whatever. Go find the individuals. Let your coach, let your trainer know if they're equipped to deal with it. Great, let them deal with it. If not, let them, connect you or refer you to someone that can deal with those things, because you shouldn't be pushing through those things. You're on your way to just something being short-term pain to becoming an injury and might be classified as overuse injury, and that's probably what it looks like to the PT. Where you've used, in their opinion, they probably understand your technique or mechanics haven't been great, but you've done it so many times. Yes, you've overused those muscles, the joint, the ligaments, tendons, cartilage, whatever. They're inflamed. Their job, you're right, is not to change your mechanics per se. They're trying to treat the injury, make the inflammation be reduced, make the pain go away. But then it falls back on, and it really started with the coach, the trainer, and the instructor, right? To understand what's the right technique and then have a communication system to where the athlete can comfortably come to you and say, hey, my shoulder hurts, my back hurts, whatever. And the coach, instructor, trainer ought to be good enough, right, to maybe ask a series of questions to determine, is this an issue? Is this something we could push through, should push through, or something we back off your load, your reps, or something else, right? So all comes
Yeah.
down, right? The major point here is that stop just doing what you're told. I mean, we're not telling athletes not to listen to their coaches and be respectful, but the coach doesn't have a crystal ball either. And a lot of coaches and instructors and trainers may not know that the athlete has a shoulder that hurts because the athlete may feel like, well, I'm not supposed to show pain. Now, that's not a sign of weakness. That's a sign of your body trying to communicate something might be off or something's wrong.
Yeah, good point. Our next question is from Joseph here. He says, in a practice session, what sequence do you suggest? Do you conduct body conditioning followed by specific skills routines?
Yeah, so I'll try to say it in ways that they're quick, succinct, that make sense. We do a dynamic warm up at the start of the routine. That gets the body temperature up. Something called synovial fluid lubricates the joints, the muscles are stretched. You have less tendency for a strain or a tear, something like that. Hey, and it's a proven fact in the research, a warm muscle can create more force. So you're going to hit the ball harder, jump higher, move faster, whatever the case is. So a good dynamic warm up is the first thing we do. Then we get into what we call activation drills, right? So if we're working on hitting, we're going to warm up in our training system, right? With our bands hooked to the hip harness, torso harness, arm cuffs, right? And all we're doing is low level bands, slow movements, but we're really starting to activate the muscles and the movements for hitting, right? To open, to close, to turn, to do all the things that we do. But we're doing low level, really strength conditioning exercises, really performing the movements of hitting if that's what we're working on that day. And that's an activation exercise. Then we basically, our methodology is, without getting too far into it, then we're going to intersperse in there once they're warmed up, everything's active, then we're going to start doing some throwing, some hitting, some jumping and hitting. We're going to do different drills to keep taking those movements, those techniques we're trying to train. And then we go back and forth between activation and throwing and then hitting and jumping, right? So it's not just we warm up, we go hit for an hour, and then we're done. And there's a real methodology. And once again, if you understand the body, the science, the sports training science, we're taking probably the best, most advanced techniques that are out there and learning how to, it's like a recipe, put them into the recipe and bake our cake, right? And our cake might be power hitting. So it's a variety of different things that we're doing, from activation to very specific throwing, hitting, going into the air, repeating that, making sure we're really not working through any fatigue. We're really trying to train the nervous system. So most of the time, the nervous system needs to be fresh. We're not trying to build endurance here. And this is a really key point. I'll make this and try to move on. And when you're training to increase power, arm speed, right? You said something earlier, and I wrote it on the whiteboard next to me, recovery. Oftentimes, a coach or instructor and trainer who doesn't understand the energy systems of the body, how to train power speed, will do 20 reps, 30 reps, 50 reps, 100 reps. Because you said something earlier, like we just hit. Well, when you're doing that, you're not working on power and speed. The nervous system starts to learn, it gets fatigued, it can't go very fast. So the stimulation on the arm, the shoulder, right? You're trying to create arm speed and ball speed is now training endurance, right? So now you're training a cross country hitter. We're not looking for cross country hitters. Bless you. We are trying to create arm speed and ball speed. So here's the deal. When we're working on power and speed, it's 5 reps max, right? It's 5 reps at a certain intensity level, either throwing, hitting, or something else. And then it's rest and recovery. It might be 30 seconds, might be 2.5, 3 or 4 minutes between sets. And that's what the body and the energy system really takes to recover the fuels and other things inside the body before that arm and shoulder's really ready to hit with almost not maximum speed, but really high intensity speed, high level speed. That way the stimulation is on arm speed, rotational speed, ball speed versus training endurance. Those are all the things that when you dig deeper into sports training principles, you'll figure out. And you can Google, and if you talk to a trainer and coach that knows what they're doing, they should be starting. If you want more, you should be able to go to them. They can start sharing things with you. And then if they're good, like I tell an athlete, okay, here's what we're talking about today, stretch shortening cycle. Go Google it. You go learn about it. And then if you're really interested, come back. We'll talk further about it, right? So anyway, at the end of that, just to answer the question fully, once we get done with our methodology, we're going to cool down, we're going to recover. And then at that point in time, the athlete needs to go stretch, go foam roll. They need to do something to enhance and speed up the recovery, right? Get the waste products out of the muscles, let everything recover, and have that athlete not going home with stiff, tight muscles, right? And staying that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really good answer. Thanks for that question, Joseph. That was, and all the questions that you've had today, Joseph, they've been awesome. But we've had some really interesting comments slash, I guess you could say hate comments on some of our videos on Facebook and Instagram lately, which are kind of interesting. Everybody's kind of just out there sharing their opinions. So one that I wanted to make sure we addressed is, yes, you can throw the ball harder or hit a volleyball harder with a lower loading position and a crossbody follow through. But hitting as hard as possible is not the only goal for a good hitter. Why do you train this way then? And then they also went on after this comment to say that you should follow through on the same side of your body, and following through crossbody will only allow you to hit into the block or the net.
Yeah, it's not true for a couple of reasons. Number one, just from a simple sense, go look at a professional pitcher who's throwing 90 to over 100 miles an hour. They never throw and keep the arm on that side of their body. They will tear their shoulders up in a hurry. The rotation of the body creates hip turn, torque, if you would, shoulder turn, arm speed, and the arm, once again, follows the turn of the shoulder from a right-handed thrower from right to left. The muscles on the back side of the shoulder, the back, the fascia, from like we've talked about a couple of weeks ago, goes from your arm up here across your shoulder diagonally, across to your left hip if you're a right-handed thrower, and even into the fascia, the connective tissue down into your left leg. All those muscles help slow the arm down in a way that progressively decelerates, slows the arm down with less isolated risk and torque on that shoulder, right? When you throw or hit a volleyball and keep your right arm on the right side of the body, there's really you're not using all those tissues on the back side of the arm to slow it down. And if you look at my shoulder here, the difference between when I turn here, there's all these muscles behind my shoulder all the way down to my left leg and thigh that can slow it down. When I go here, it takes the shoulder forward, it puts it into a bad position, and there's not a lot of musculature or fascia back there that can slow the arm down, right? So this is a perfect example of an old school volleyball mentality or myth that's not supported by any science. And if you go back to, if you look at baseball and you go to like, how did baseball, they took away a lot of the shoulder injuries with strength and rehab and mechanics, proper throwing technique, right? And they've eliminated a lot of the shoulder injuries, right? So look at another sport, look at the example, but dig deeper under the covers to understanding the mechanics. And maybe we need to do a whole session one day on just really getting into the mechanics and the physiology of how the arm works, how you slow it down. And it doesn't matter whether you're, hitting a volleyball, hitting a tennis ball, throwing a baseball, throwing a football. The mechanics are very similar, and how you slow that arm down and keep the arm from being injured is really important. And once again, I know we've said this before, one final point on this. Most of injuries that happen to the shoulder don't happen as the arm is speeding up. They happen when the arm is slowing down. So if I'm hitting and I'm having a lot of shoulder pain and my right hand is going on the right side of the body, physiologically, there's not a lot of elastic tissues to slow it down. Now, here's the other point. You can hit more than just hitting into the one zone by rotating your body and swinging through the ball, right? So we teach right? We'll teach a cut shot to the 5 or a really deep cut to the 4 zone, right? And as we're doing that, the body's turning and the arm is still coming through. And in this case, we will allow the right hand to come down to the right hip, right? We also tell the athlete you have to have different shots. It's not as hard. You're not going to be able to hit with as much velocity, turning and going to the 5 or a deep 4 cut shot. But most of the time, if you think about it, and you can speak to this obviously, right? If I'm a right-handed left side hitter and I'm coming in, I've been hitting line to the 1 zone, right? That pin blocker and middle blocker, what are they going to start doing? And even the back row player, everybody's cheating over to take the down the line shot away. I don't have to hit at full velocity to hit a cut shot to the 5, or really what I would consider a really nasty cut, a good cut shot to the 4, right? I don't have to hit that ball as hard as I can for that to score, because I got 2 blockers in front of me. I've got defensive. Everybody's sliding over trying to take away the line. So basically it gives me a gap, an opening to cut it to the 5, cut it to the 4. But we're not teaching that athlete to try to swing with as much force, because that puts a lot of pressure on the shoulder once again, right? They can still hit that ball though at 80%, 85%, and because there's oftentimes no one there, right? Like we've said, everybody's moved to the left. They don't have to hit it as hard as they can. They just have to control the ball. So we're not always going across our body. We are on a full shot down the line, but we want the athlete to still rotate, because that creates, go Google this, everybody. It's called summation of forces, right? It's a kinesiological term, or go look that up. And what it says is if I turn my hips, if I turn my spine, turn my core, turn my shoulders, and I stretch the muscles on the front side of the shoulders, the pec major, the internal rotators, deltoids, right? As that arm starts to come through, I'm adding the forces from my legs, my hips, all these muscles, all the way up through the arm. Summation of forces means I'm going to hit the ball harder, even if I take my hand down to my right hip. But my hand is not going behind my body where my hand goes back here, because you can see from my shoulder here how that shoulder rotates forward. That's not a good position. So if I take it here, I can basically use lats and other muscles to swing hard, bring the arm down. My shoulder blade muscles are keeping my shoulder in a stable, really safe position to do that.
Yeah, and I think a good point here that Billy was making is that when the players are doing cut shots, or let's say they're doing off-speed shots as well, that's not the time that we're talking about them doing the full wind-up for hitting and full cross body. Like, the mechanics might be similar, but you're doing a tip, you're doing a roll shot, you're using the block. Like, your mechanics are going to be a little bit different. What we're talking about is specifically when you're trying to hit the ball hard and crush the ball. That's what your mechanics are going to look like for that. And yeah, that's not the only goal for a good hitter. The only goal for a good hitter isn't just to be able to hit the ball as hard as possible. Obviously, we need hitters to be smart, be able to score points, and if that's with the different shots that they can hit, that's great. But just in the specific video that he commented on, it's just talking about how to hit the ball hard, and that's the time we're talking about it. We're not talking about all different case scenarios in one video, because obviously we want hitters to be able to hit different shots.
Darian, it's what you're saying in a little different sense is you got to be able to hit different shots. You got to have a repertoire of different shots. And it's just like, go back to the baseball analogy is, right, is if I'm a pitcher and all I have is a fastball, then basically hitters are going to load up and know every time they can swing away, right? And they're going to hope that they're going to connect with bat speed coming against ball speed, and if they contact it, that ball's gone, right? So a good pitcher has more than just a fastball, right? They've got cutters, they've got off-speed pitches, they've got pitches that move. A good hitter ought to have the same thing. We're not teaching someone to go out and swing as hard as you can on every swing. There are times where we want them to, and when we do, to your point, we want them to use really good mechanics that they can hit hard, protect their shoulder, protect their back, protect their knees when they land. But we're also going to teach them different shots, right? Not always hitting a down ball, sometimes high and hard into the hands, sometimes cut shots to go away from the block, right? So there's a lot more to it than just swing as hard as you can and worry about where your arm's going, right? I mean, develop different shots to make you much more versatile and make you much more of an asset to a coach or program that wants you to score and terminate points and isn't worried about hitting the ball as hard as you can every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'll have to save some of these social questions for next week. I'm excited to get further into them. We are out of time today. Thank you guys all for the great questions. Next week, we will be live Tuesday at 3 p.m. Put it on your calendars if you want. We'll do VolleyTalk number two. Actually, I think we might be going live next week, Wednesday during the day. Sorry, I got that wrong. We are actually going to be going live during the day, and we were going to show you guys some behind the scenes of our new offering, which is live month-to-month small group private training. We will be training a few athletes that day, and we just wanted to share with you guys some behind the scenes from that. So next week's live, it'll probably be, I don't know, what do you think, Billy? Like 10 a.m. Mountain Time?
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I'll give you a little bit more detail on that because it's all coming together. So here's the deal. We for sure have two athletes. We have one athlete that is trying to get out of school in finals that day. So we're going to have a 17-year-old athlete who's committed to go play college. She'll be leaving this summer. She is a left-handed right side hitter. So we'll be able to show how we're training her. We have a left side 16-year-old kid from Texas coming in, right? So she'll be on. So we'll have a left side hitter, right? And then if it works out, if we can get the local athlete out of school, we have the 15-year-old middle, right, who'll come in. So we'll have left side, right side, middle. Jim Murray will be here, the director at Front Range. So Kelly, I believe, is coming into town, who's the physical therapist that works with us. So you'll have at least 3 of the PowerCore 360 coaches. Darian will be there as well, doing her thing, but we'll be talking and showing different ways we train, actually part of a training session. And one of the things I know we're going to talk about is getting out of training mode and getting into competition mode, because all these are athletes that are really high level. 2 of them have actually all 3 of them have trained at least a year and a half, 2 years with us, right? So they're all high level. You can consider this as an advanced session we're going to be doing. You'll get to look behind the curtains a little bit and see what we're doing. And then I know Jim's going to talk a lot about, hey, let's get out of training mode. You guys, especially one of the athletes I own, is going to be going off to college this fall. We got to get into a competition mode. Let's let go of the training thinking and the training mode. How do we go and compete? What do we do when we go into practice or a game or an event situation? We shouldn't be thinking about what should we be thinking about? What shouldn't we be thinking about? How do we compete and let go of all the training and the instruction and the technique? How do we go score points and win matches?
Yeah, that'll be something that's really exciting and something that we've never done before. So make sure you set your calendars for Wednesday, sometime in the morning before noon, Mountain Time. So sync that up with your schedule if you are interested in seeing what one of our events, or not clinics, but some of our events training looks like with athletes. So I think it'll be really exciting. Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining today, and thank you all again for the great questions. We hope to see you next week. And if you want to watch any of these other Volley Talks that we have done 11 others now, 12 including this one. They're all on our YouTube and Instagram. So if you want to watch them on there, if you want more before next week, that's where you can find it. Thank you again for listening. Oh, we got a comment to end it. Great job, guys. My daughter will be at the clinic in Ohio. Great. We're super excited to see you guys there.
Cool. Awesome.